The South China Morning Post is predicting a weak Q1 for China, and that's something that I want to dig into in this video. So smash that like button and subscribe if you're new. You're watching More Money. Let's get it. What's up, guys? This is a quick video. The South China Morning Post came out with an article stating how the recent wave of Omicron has started to stretch the Chinese provinces to the brink, which could potentially lead to a weak first quarter. And let's dive right into it. And you can see here from this first slide that China is clinging to its zero COVID policy and the zero tolerance approach to the pandemic that relies on stringent lockdowns is now causing many local governments to start struggling with balancing debt control with the strict prevention measures. So basically, in other words, all of those economic consequences that economists have been forecasting are now starting to happen. And so why exactly are they starting to enter into debt issues? Well, let's move on to the next slide here. And it says that local governments in China are facing a growing financial burden to meet Beijing's hardline zero COVID strategy amid rising healthcare costs and efforts to control debt. And I think the key takeaway there is the rising healthcare costs that is adding to the burden that local governments are bearing with this zero COVID strategy. And so what exactly does that entail? It doesn't necessarily mean more people in hospitals. It also means more costs for testing people, as this article will go in and describe further. And of course, guys, you can see that this, of course, is during the biggest virus surge that China has been battling over the last 2 years, as many cities have now imposed travel bans and lockdowns. And it's not like we haven't seen anything like that here in North America. We got hit with Omicron late in 2021 and we completely shut down everything. So it looks like the same things are happening in China now. But the one thing that I found very interesting is that an analyst in China said that globally pandemic control policies are being adjusted, which is true. Anybody who did previously implement a zero-based policy moved away from it, except for China. And so what he believes is that the possibility for an adjustment in China is also increasing. And I think he's pretty much on the bandwagon for everyone who's saying that China needs to move away from this policy. Otherwise, they're going to continue to negatively impact their economy, which we're now starting to really see. But over on this next slide, I do have to say that I think it's less wishful thinking now, because you'll notice that Premier Lin Kuei has said that the country's zero COVID policy will be fine-tuned to minimize disruptions to the economy, but there are no signs of it being abandoned, despite fierce debate among economists. So here's where I say there's a little bit of wishful thinking. I don't know how you cannot abandon a zero COVID policy and minimize disruptions to the economy. I feel like the more you go to one, the more you impact the other. So in other words, the more you move towards a zero COVID policy, the more you impact the economy. I'm having a tough time reconciling how you can do both while having a strong economy while zero COVID policies. Now, if anyone understands that more than I do, please let me know in the comments. I'm always trying to learn more here. And so you can see that Shanghai, up until now, is resisting full lockdowns. They're just urging their residents to work from home. But what I think is the real impact here, and what I think will really slow down the economy, is by hurting the provinces even more by financially straining them further. And so where that comes into play is all of the mass testing that they're doing is adding another financial burden to the already strained finances. In the last video, we already talked about how the biggest item that the provinces are going to the federal CCP for is more money this year, because they're getting more and more cash strapped because, of course, the real estate market has slowed down. And you guys already know the biggest source of funds for these local governments is selling land leases. Well, if those land leases sales are coming down, then they need to make up that budget shortfall in one way or another. And now if you have slowing land leases, but you also have a higher burden of healthcare costs, you can see that they're really, really getting strained. And with their healthcare costs, it doesn't look like they're getting help right now, because you can see here that in 2020, the central government dedicated funds to help local governments battle the pandemic. But local authorities have had to rely on their own revenue since last year. So since 2021, they've been relying on their own revenue. So in 2022, when they're more cash strapped, because the land lease sales have pretty much tanked, what are they going to do now? And so here's where it gets a little bit scary. And I understand that you guys don't like it when I provide like these Dr. Doom type videos, but It's all in context. I am a owner of Alibaba. I believe in China, but I do believe that there's going to be some short-term impacts, and this is one of them, and I like to point them out on the channel. And so Moody's has just come out and said, we expect more downside to the Chinese economy to materialize in the first quarter, with the economic pain possibly stretching to the early parts of the second quarter should the lockdowns continue if the Omicron spread proves to be more than a flash in the pan. And of course, guys, you guys know that there's going to be reverberating impacts here. There are businesses that are not going to survive this third or fourth wave of lockdowns that they're experiencing now. So it's something to really pay attention to. And there's a lot of you guys who respectively go into the comments and say that, look, Amazon did very well when we had a full lockdown here. But the difference is when Amazon was doing very well, it's because we are also in the early stages of the pandemic, and there was a lot of families that were cash flush. But now we're kind of entering into this weird market where you can't really fight last year's war with respect to how China's going to respond to this. You guys already know Alibaba has been reporting for the last 2 quarters that the Chinese consumer is starting to slow. Everyone's starting to see that. And even in their predictions for their GDP, they're forecasting the lowest GDP number that they forecast since the country opened up its borders to international trade. So we are seeing impacts here. And so I wouldn't compare this to Amazon early in the pandemic in North America. I think you'd be making a mistake if you expected a boom for Alibaba with respect to continued zero COVID policies in China. Now, moving on, if we were to try to quantify what those additional healthcare costs are for you, let me try to put it into perspective. So the chief macro analyst with Great Wall Securities estimated the cost of mass nucleic acid testing was somewhere around 24 to 48 yuan per person in China. And that's a huge burden for many local governments with populations of more than 1 million people who would typically spend less than 200 yuan per year for each resident. So essentially what you're saying is every time you run a test for your residences in your community, it costs an additional, take 48 divided by 12 or 24 divided by 12. So an additional, 6 to 12%. Correct me on my math, guys, but I think it's an additional 6 to 12% of your total healthcare spending for that year. And that's just one test. What happens if you do 5 tests throughout the year? So you've increased your healthcare spending for your province by somewhere around 30 to 60% in that year just by 5 tests. So that's what I mean on how strained the government coffers can get as a result of zero continued COVID policies and continued testing measures. And by some measures, that healthcare spending of 200 yuan per year by person is already really low. So overall, I think the real takeaway here is that a lot of you guys do ask in the comments, when do you expect Alibaba's share to rebound? Now, of course, we did see a rebound from that $70 per share area back up to that $100 per share area. So I do like that that happened. Friday, we closed really strong, which was really great to see. But I think a larger term recovery back to the $200-300 per share area is really going to be contingent on China emerging from these pandemic-related economic issues. And I think that takes time. And we're starting to see now that the next quarter is going to be probably similar to how it was last quarter. And I think we're all really expecting that. But what this really shows to us is if you are a bull on Alibaba, like I am, there's going to be opportunities here. Now, I was out of the country when the shares declined under $100 down to the $80 per share. So it was really tough for me to pick some up. But I'm really watching this now, and as this continues to decline, or if it even does decline, I'm going to be very selective on when I start doubling down. So guys, let me know in the comments what you think about what Q1 is going to look like for China. I'm really interested in the discussion here, but also guys, let me know what you guys think medium term to long term on the Alibaba opportunity. I think a lot of you guys still believe, like myself, that this is a great opportunity. And also, if you haven't seen the previous video where I talked more in detail about the issues facing the Chinese economy, you can get to that video right here.